given some questions, but I'm going to start somewhere else, if that's okay. I would like to know about your superpowers as a mom.
My goodness. Thank you so much, first of all, Michael, for having me. Super, super excited to be here. And I did post in the group as well, in the chat section. If you have kids, please feel free to share the ages of your kids. I just always love to understand more around how many kids are we really talking about and what are their ages. I think it's always fun as well. My superpower, I think that my superpower is I just am super, super structured around my kids' activities. I feel like if there's a trend that goes that is happening on Instagram or is a TikTok that says my something around the word escapes my mind. It might be my surgery that is happening to me, but it's essentially the death of my existence, right? This wanting to structure everything. And I always believe that I can work 9 to 5 and take the kids to tennis and swimming and do their piano and do the homework all before bedtime at 7 o'clock. For some reason, I always think that's possible. Sometimes we get it done, and sometimes I'm falling apart. I'm yelling and screaming, "Where's your tennis racket? Why don't you have this?" So I think, as parents, we always feel like, especially those of us that are very wanting our kids to do everything, it's always very stressful for me. But yeah, that would be my superpower, is structuring everything and trying to get everything done all in one.
Yeah. And superpowers can be very taxing to have. So it's has a dark side as well. Daanish, what's yours as a dad? What's your superpower?
I don't know that I have a superpower.
Oh, you do. I know you do. I've seen you.
I don't know that I have a superpower, but what I would rather say is what intentions do I act on? And I think the intentions that I act on with my son, and I'm a single dad, though I have a co-parent, is to try to encourage every type of curiosity I can, no matter my level of fatigue, and to kind of meet him where he's at. If he's feeling distress, if he's feeling sadness, to kind of never make it sound like it's unnatural to the moment, but to really kind of acknowledge that and to model for him what it's like to feel those feelings in his body, and then kind of go back to the story that he might be telling himself, and basically make sure that he has the internal tools from a very early age to face all the challenges that come with being a human. And being a human in so many ways isn't easy, as all of us on the call know. So there's my answer.
That's a nice one. I would encourage anybody who, and you don't have to be a parent, you could be an aunt, an uncle, or you could write what your mom or your dad's superpower were to put them in the chat. I'll just share that I think mine is probably silliness and sense of humor, and my daughter may not agree because she's getting to an age where my jokes are no longer funny, but at least she can laugh at me if she's not laughing with me. So I wanted just to introduce ourselves in that way first, because I think I've had a little bit of time to talk to Blessing a while back and Daanish, and I know for myself that this role of mother or father holds a lot of power, and we are that, or at least for me, before I am anything else. So just to make sure that you get to know Daanish and Blessing a little, but I'll now move kind of into the topic, which is about the future of parenthood. And I wanted to start, Blessing, with you, because you're doing a ton of work to figure out how to build a different future. And I was wondering if you could first say a little bit about how you came to this, because you've a pretty interesting story working with companies in the US and now being in Lagos. Like, how did you come to this? And a little bit about what you do, but then sort of what, are you seeing examples of what the future could look like now? Are you seeing examples in Nigeria or in other places in the continent and the world where something's happening, maybe it's a small scale, that could be the future for everybody in 20 years? But let's start with how you got here.
Pequenas, faz um estardalhaço.
So my journey started. Oh, I think we're getting some echo somewhere.
If everybody could mute, I think it might be a translator, but
yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much. My journey started in a little town called Parkersburg, West Virginia. For those who know where that is on the map in the United States, I started my career with a 3-month-old. So my bosses were expecting, 22-year-old with all the preppy skirts and, time, journal, time management and everything. And I walked in and my very first question was, do you have childcare? And I think they were all froze in the middle of the snow there. And they said, well, this is your first day of work. I said, yes, well, childcare, the daycare center is not opened. And so I would need to just chill a little bit until it opens, because I worked in manufacturing. My background is actually in chemical engineering. So I was going to go work in a manufacturing site, and they opened at 6 a.m. and childcare started at 9 a.m. And so this was my first foray into really understanding the challenges of parenthood, especially in the 21st century. This was way back in 2008, 2009. And if everybody recall, back then, we pretty much blamed women for everything, right? Like we were like, oh, if you could just color code properly, if you could just manage your time, if you could just ask your husband to help you, if you could just wake up early and try to get so many things done, pack the lunches the night before. So there was all of these different acts that just didn't really add up for me, because just like my co-panelist, I was a single mom. So I was like, well, I have to do all of this. So I don't know how these hacks are going to help me. And so that was my first foray into parenthood and work. And it led me into advocating for parents in the workplace. And then again, that work expanded into just realizing that this wasn't even, a parent issue. This was just a breakdown in how the system works, a system that really is not, solving for care, right? Doesn't want to solve for care. We want to solve for everything else. We want to solve for roads. We want to solve for electricity. We want to solve for power, but we don't want to solve for the work that actually makes, other work possible, which is care. And so that led to studying more honestly on the side. I was actually still very much working. I did end up working for another 15 years in corporate America, but during that time, there was a lot of work around passing policies within the private sector, working with the Obama administration, the Biden administration, just to figure out, how do we support working families? What are the policies that can move us forward? And then during the I think it was a Trump administration, some administration that I didn't like, I said, you know what, I'm just going to go back to Nigeria. I'm just going to there's just a lot of opportunities there. I see Africa as a place, it's almost like a blank slate. And I felt like, who better than me to help sort of, create the roadmap to put in a proper care infrastructure. So now we work with governments. We work with governments in the United States, in Europe, in Africa, to help them understand the care economy, help them understand how they can build infrastructures, think about infrastructure the same way we think about power, the same way we think about roads, the same way we think about investments in AI. We need to think about, investments in care to power the work that we actually want parents, right, to do. And then fast forward to now, I think for me, when I think about, 20 years and the future, I think that, I look at countries like Denmark, I look at countries like Finland, and they've designed their work to fit into their their way of life, into raising their children. So if you go to work, you drop off your kids, you finish work, the schools are still open, you pick up your kid and you go home, versus what we have in the US or even here in Lagos, Nigeria, where, school closes at 2 p.m. and you still need to keep working till 5 p.m. Like that just doesn't add up. And I think that the future really is going to be that we find ways to continue to effectively combine work and family, and understanding that as we invest in our children, as we invest in our work, as we invest in the economy, it is actually as we invest in our children and in our families, it is an investment in the economy. It is an investment in, in business growth and development. And I think that is the messaging that we need to pass on to leaders, whether in the private sector or in the public sector, to not see, it almost, back then, right, we basically rewarded people that didn't want to be parents. That was really what the workplace was doing. It's like, oh, you want to spend time here till 7 p.m., 8 p.m.? Oh, great. You're a great worker. Here is your bonus. Here is your salary increase. And you want to leave early to pick up your kids. Well, sorry, we're just not going to reward you for that because you are not spending enough time at work. That is still the mindset today. So how do we move that mindset from, penalizing parents and families for wanting to be active in their own, in their children's lives and in the development of the next generation, right, of tax-paying citizens, if you will.
Yeah, there's someone made a comment in the chat, Joan, I think I know who that may be, but it says design the work so it fits into the life of a family, the powerful goal. And you talked about Finland and Denmark. A lot of people feel like those places are kind of unrelatable. I would say most of the world feels like, yeah, that's great. We've heard that story. We can't really do that. We've all sorts of other issues. Is there a particular company or a particular city or government, maybe on the continent, but somewhere that's not a Nordic country, and it could be a small example where you say, what they're doing right now today is inspiring. This is what it could look like to design the work so it fits into the life of a family. Is there just one or two examples that you use when you try to show people what's possible?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I look at companies we have a partner, and they've been one of our longest partner and at the Care Gap, and it's Indeed. And what I love about them is, one, remote work. Right? It's not that they don't want people to come into the office. They've basically made it easy for you to work from home. Beyond that, they provide various benefits to their employees so that employees can have access to childcare, have access to, parental leave support, have access to breastfeeding support, have, men receive the same amount of paid leave, paid parental leave as women, which I have to take credit for. We did spend some time advising them on that. But they have equal paid parental leave. There is equality when it comes to child care and aging care support. And I think this is actually an American company, right? So because I always say that America is like literally on the lowest end of the scale just because of the huge capitalist mindset. But this is an American company that operates all across Africa, Europe as well. But they have designed a workplace that makes it easier for everybody to contribute while being a parent or a caregiver. And I think that is something that we can all emulate. Yes, there are some jobs that cannot happen remotely, and that's okay. And those jobs can, we can have staggered shifts. We can have, job sharing. We can come up with ways that allows people to be present with their with their families when they need to. And it's not, a lot of time people are like, well, Blessing, like you are working around the clock. Why are you saying that, why are you always preaching flexibility? And I say, that is exactly why, because when we actually improve the flexibility provided to families or any individual at all, then they're able to figure out how truly ambitious they want to be. And I think that can then be the baseline for compensation or for performance, right? But coming out of the gate and saying, oh, flexibility doesn't work, let's get everybody to the office 5 days a week, which is what we are starting to see. I mean, I don't want to call companies out, but we have companies like Chevron that is saying, oh, you have to come back to work 5 days a week, even though they have been operating for the past 5 years with 2 to 3 days a week, and the company has been doing really, really well. We've not had any like profitability issues or performance issues. So again, we need to look at what is the real reason why we're asking people to come back to work, because it's definitely not a productivity issue. It's definitely not a performance issue. It is simply because we want control. Companies want control over people's lives and how people spend their time. And that is where we need to say, this is not going to happen in this century going forward, because we need to have time for our family, for our children, and that is how we're going to do our best work.
Thanks, Blessing. If you have in the chat examples of companies or countries that you think are doing a good job, please put them in the chat so we can make a collection. I'm going to come back to you, Blessing, because I have another question, but I want to bring Daanish in for a little bit first, because there are two things we're thinking about: the future of work and also the future of technology, in particular AI, and how parenthood will change. And I also want to start with Donna. We've spoken a bunch about this, and you're a father who happened to be an expert in AI. And before we get into the future, I would love if you could share the present in your house, because you do amazing stuff with AI with your son. And when I heard you talk about it, I can't do the things that you do because I don't know how to shape the technology to my needs. But I feel like if some of the things you're doing could be the future. Could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So just for the very rapidly, for the benefit of all those listening here, I have a background in technology and international peace and security. I worked on different conflict zones, primarily for the UN Secretariat on different Security Council mandates for almost 2 decades. But I also did a lot of work in artificial intelligence, particularly natural language processing, which is at the intersection of computation and linguistics, which really forms the basis for large language models, the paradigm that we see today. And then I spent the last 3-4 years working in partnership with the frontier, what are the so-called frontier AI labs like OpenAI and DeepMind and others, on one problem in particular, which is how do we control the model outputs to comport with human laws, norms, and values across cultures. That's just to give you some background on where I'm coming from. So, controlling outputs is something that I've been, obsessively working on for a few years now. And what Michael was referring to when he talks about how I use AI in a number of ways. So I'm a big believer in number one, what Sal Khan from Khan Academy, for those of you that might be familiar with Khan Academy, have said, or he also gave a TED talk on this, is that when everyone has an individualized tutor, when every child has an individualized tutor, that shifts the entire distribution one or more standard deviations to the right in performance, by which basically it's the tide coming in and all boats rising, right? That's kind of the idea in terms of the possibilities that are there, right? The potential that's there. And so in our house, we use AI in a few ways. One is as a kind of oracle, where my son is obsessed with different cetaceans, so whales, different ocean creatures. He's obsessed with black holes in space and different kinds of stars and galaxies. And we talk, we turn on voice mode with some of these AI models and basically have conversations with the AI, the three of us, right? That's obviously mediated by me. And one of the key things that I want to point out right away here is that when we have those conversations, thankfully, up to now at least, who knows how things will change when he gets older, but up to now, the topics we're talking about, I have a little bit of knowledge in, right? And every time the AI makes a mistake, he calls the AI robot. He just refers to as robot, like, robot, how are you doing today? Robot, can you tell me more about XYZ, that kind of thing. And
just before you finish, just real quick,
yeah.
Can you just say, because it's very intentional, right? There's a reason that you are calling it robot. Can you just say, and not John? What is the reason? And then come back to your story.
Yeah.
I think this is important.
Yeah. So my 5-year-old son, or he's turning 5 in 3 days. My almost 5-year-old is acutely aware that his father, kind of has a role in building these robots, right? And has worked with the underlying machinery, and stressing that it is a robot. It's made by humans. It is prone to errors. It says things that are wrong very, very confidently, is, to be honest, part of the training that I'm imparting to him. so that he understands that we had a role in building these things. These things are not, they have a set of values. It's not a neutral platform. What values we imbue in them is a very, very consequential decision, and it's another area that I have spent a lot of time thinking about, as you know. So we call it robot purposefully so that he is acutely aware of that fact, right? And he also says things like, sometimes it says things that are incorrect. So he happens to know a lot about cetaceans. Children can be like that. They focus in on a particular area and they go very deep. Cetaceans, i.e. whales. Sometimes whichever model we're talking to will say something incorrect about a particular species. And he'll say, silly robot, that's not right. I'm like, that's right, silly robot, that's incorrect. You're hallucinating. And it'll say, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, you're absolutely correct. So we use it in that way. But I think the way that Michael was implying, which is a deeper thing that's hugely important to me, is how do I configure these models to understand, multiple worldviews, multiple ways of being and multiple ways of knowing, drawing on different world systems and value systems, be it Buddhism, be it Taoism, be it Sufism, or any other, kind of a huge awareness of nature or indigenous wisdom, whatever those things are that have been consequential in terms of informing me and my life direction. I want a way to find, to tell stories to my son from that worldview or from those multiple worldviews and realities. And so I have trained the models and configured the models to draw on those texts, to draw on those wisdom traditions. And basically, we have an ongoing epic or a long-running story that I've been telling him with different characters that involve, him going on different kinds of space adventures, where he encounters beings from different galaxies, and talks to them, learns from them, and he learns about these different values. And anytime he gets stuck in those stories, he's the protagonist in these stories, by the way. And anytime he gets stuck, he has all these sort of this council of elders that he talks to, that he can call upon at will to get their advice. And they talk about different, they draw from their, be it Lao Tzu, be it, a particular Zen master, whatever that is, right? And that's how I'm using these models.
Do you see, because my daughter's a bit older now, but I would love to be able to do that, but I don't understand the technology and I don't know the risk and I don't know how to train. Do you envision a future in which, any parent can have this, robot that they work with, that they train, that the kid helps to train, and it creates bedtime stories or whatever it is? Is that something that you see happening in the future at a big scale?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not the first person to say it. I forget the philosopher's name. There's a philosopher of technology who, in I think the earlier mid-90s, one said that what software is ultimately is the embodied practices of a community rendered into code. Now, one of the things that we've had up to now is that the software has been coming from a kind of like a mono source primarily, which is Silicon Valley, right? But what these tools allow us to do is that's the level of democratization that they enable, right? Which is that the software can be written by any of us now. I mean, and of course, the US models come at a certain price point, but when you look at some of the Chinese models that are out there, and of course, I'm not here to pretend that there are no downsides to using them. Of course, it's a different set of challenges on both sides, and we can get into that as well. But I don't want to detract from the topic at hand. But those are much they're more inexpensive, let's say. And so really, this is giving a certain power into the hands of, average users around the world to do precisely that. What that philosopher talked about. How do we, imbue how do you render the embodied practices, the way of world knowing, the way of world being, and epistemology and ontology into code. And I think that there can be a democratization in that, and I think things are already headed in that direction.
One other question, and then I'd like to talk about some of the risks. Is I've actually just finished at a meeting that was about AI and mental health, which is a sort of a burgeoning industry with a lot of investment in it, and a lot of people find this kind of frightening. And I know you have you use AI also as sort of accompaniment, but alongside a variety of tools. What's your perspective on the potential of AI to be supportive to parents' mental health in the future?
I think generally positive, with a big note of caution. It depends on how you use it. So I think the way that I would recommend using it is, one of the things that I often do is I seek literature reviews, from the models, and of course I tell the models that I'm going to be looking at the sources to ensure that you're not hallucinating. Please do not give me any made up sources, right? And I want you to list the sources as well. And the models have gotten better and better. I mean, I've been at it for several years, as you can imagine, but they've gotten a lot better in this regard. But to synthesize research, to synthesize best practice when it comes to these types of things, I think that is a good way to use it. The risk of sycophancy, which many of the models had to an acute degree, in my view, earlier, which has since been mitigated and it's gotten a little bit better. But the risk of sycophancy is real, where by sycophancy, of course, I mean where it just says affirming things in a kind of monotonic way without really understanding the complexities of what you're saying, and not really being held to account. A lot of effort has gone into calibrating the model's outputs. I'm no defender of the big labs, but a lot of effort has gone into calibrating the model's outputs to ensure that they're very, very careful in the context of mental health. That's because in a handful of instances, there have been extremely negative outcomes there, where individuals have taken their own lives, which is very, very scary. So again, I back to your question, I think they're useful for synthesizing research. They're useful for saying, look, I'm facing this kind of situation. What in early childhood development literature, or in psychology literature, or in parental support literature, what are some of the best practices or most effective ways for dealing with this kind of situation? What do you think is useful, right? And then sometimes, if I'm completely honest and vulnerable here in front of some 276 people, I sometimes, when I'm experiencing peaks of frustration, I will write down, what I'm experiencing as a way of recording and processing. But there, I'm also very careful when I read what it says back. I don't take it to heart. For me, it becomes a way of externalizing, because when you're parenting completely by yourself and you have like 2.5 full-time jobs, it's kind of really, it can be really challenging, as many of you on the call know.
One question that came in for you, Daanish, is from Sita Pai, who is the director of kind of like public broadcasting children's content in Boston. And she says you're very intentional about exhibiting best practices, but one of the concerns is that the vast majority of families don't have your background, your capacities, don't understand the risk. And so instead of doing what you do, they just kind of give the kids tech independently, and is asking, in your perspective, what should the responsibility of the companies that produce the tech be? to prevent use that isn't good for parents and kids?
So this is a big question. This is something I care very deeply about. I'm working again, when I say 2.5 jobs, one of this, and all unpaid. One of the things that I'm working on very hard is precisely this issue. So I don't want to jump too far ahead in previewing, the publication, but as a broad thesis, my view has always been, how do we have systems level interventions that prevent this kind of thing, right? Can our intervention be architectural? So, for example, in a related area, in a highly related area, I should say, which is that of recommender AI. Recommender AI is the term that someone in my field would use to describe social media. Because what social media, for example, ultimately is in an ocean of infinite information, endless information, what floats to the top, what's second, what's third, what's 219th, what's 1000th, etc. And so, the debate is often around content moderation, which I think is a bit of a red herring and a trap, because that, as we say in America, that becomes a game of whack-a-mole. It becomes impossible to moderate content, right? Because it can be replicated and posted again and again and again, endlessly, and now increasingly by bots. What I think is effective is when we make architectural systems level interventions, where when we say to the companies that the kind of way in which you optimize, again, that old question of what floats to the top in an ocean of endless information, what comes first, what comes second, what comes third, how do we control what that is? And one of the things that I'm working very hard on is, and forgive the technical language, but what are called bridge-based ranking algorithms. Now, what bridge-based ranking algorithms essentially do is they say, look, you have two communities, let's say the Eagles and the Falcons, who, for the sake of this example, hate each other, do not talk to each other whatsoever, or at war with each other. So within the Eagles and within the Falcons, a certain issue has salience inside of that community by itself, right? So that's the kind of endogenous dynamic. Autochtonously, that issue is rising to the top. Everyone within the Eagles is talking about this issue, and everyone in the Falcons is talking about this issue independently. So it clearly has salience across two communities that don't talk to each other. So that is what should float to the top. And that's how we determine the ranking within recommendation, right? And what that does is it points us collectively at a systems level at what our shared areas of vulnerability are, be it inflation, be it the challenges of raising a child by yourself, be it fears about the geopolitical climate or the environment, whatever that is, right? And that becomes the focus in terms of which topics get the most salience versus the current paradigm, which is what gets you the most engaged. And I'm using engaged in scare quotes because often what gets you the most engaged is what gets you the most angry, right? Or triggered, et cetera. So that's how it is in recommender AI. When it comes to generative AI, like ChatGPT, Claude, Anthropic, et cetera, Gemini, all the LLM models, the very focus of my life and my work now is to find ways to impose hard constraints on the outputs of these models. That's actually what I'm doing full time. And when I say hard constraints, I mean mathematical proofs that ensure that the models do not produce outputs that violate certain laws, norms, and values. And so we build hybrid systems that are a combination of, again, for those of us who are in the field, I imagine of some 200 plus people, maybe there are some technologists in the audience, symbolic and sub-symbolic architectures that allow for that kind of thing.
So just to make sure, since I'm not a technical expert, what I heard you say, but let me know if it was right, and then I'm going to come back to you, Blessing, is so one is the companies should, the way they program should incentivize not for engagement, which tends to be things that make us angry, but something else that has a more positive effect on us and gives more valuable information. And there should just be some rules about what these technologies can do. Is that right? Is that a fair?
That's fair. I think
Yeah.
that the architectural intervention that's needed prioritizes areas of shared vulnerability across communities rather than what gets us most angry.
Yeah. Got it.
And then more deeply that people of different values, different worldviews, including moms, dads, parents, are actually involved in building some of these tools. Though I will say again that we can't tech our way out of systems level issues. There are certain society level questions and conversations that need to be had that I think this new publication actually underlines in a very important way.
Yeah. So Blessing, I'm going to actually build on that and come back to you, Blessing, because I had this experience a couple of years ago, maybe almost 2 years ago. I was at a conference and this guy was talking about AI, expert, and it was super interesting. He was talking about how it was going to help us communicate with whales. And I want to communicate with whales as much as the next guy. It's very interesting. But I went up to him after the conference and I said, have you ever thought about how it could help parents? And he said, no. And that was the end of the conversation. And it sort of strikes me that especially in tech companies that are designing these things, it's not an environment that's really inviting for people who have young kids, especially women. And so we're not having people in these companies who have lived experience with babies and toddlers doing infant care. And maybe this is sort of one of the reasons that there isn't as much utility in them for parents. So I'm curious about your thoughts on the focus on getting people with, real lived experience of infant care into these companies working on these things. Is that something we should be focused on? Have you seen anybody working on this? Because that would seem to solve some of Daanish's problems.
Okay. Is that question for me or Daanish?
For you. Like, how do we get them? How do we get the tech companies to see the experience of caring for an infant as a valuable asset in the company so that they can design stuff that's better for parents?
Well, I mean, I think that, one of the reasons why we are still here is because no one really values care. And the reason is because women are already doing it, and women are doing it for free. And so why should we invest in something that is already being done for free? I like to be very direct, and I think that is why there is no real ROI for companies to do this. The reason why we're not seeing, I think I saw somebody in the comment section talking about, parents or, women being involved and being listened to in the design and use of AI. And I think one is that, women rarely get approached to get involved in these conversations. I mean, we've all been to the AI conferences. I think there's one going on right now. There's an AI summit somewhere. There's always one every week. And when you go there, it's primarily men, primarily white men. And so the question then becomes, who are we really solving for? Who is AI solving for? Is AI solving for white men in business, or is AI trying to solve problems? And I think that AI is really one of those things where we need to start being very honest with ourselves around exactly what AI is solving. And I understand, I use ChatGPT myself. I use so many other different tools. I think those are really basic. I'm sure Daanish would agree with me on that. Those are really, really basic use case for AI. how can we get AI to solve for care? I think that's a real big question that, we need to bring up. I think the other thing that, just back to your question around why can't, what are the ways companies can bring women in? And I think a lot of the people that are really knee deep in infant care right now just don't have the time. It's a time poverty issue. If you don't have time to even, I remember when I have 4 kids, and, even my 4-year-old still wakes up in the middle of the night. I'm already sleep deprived. The last thing I want to do is go sit down with, tech bros to be discussing AI. But I think that there's room for that if we truly are interested in solving for care. If we see care as an infrastructure that actually allows AI to operate properly. And what do I mean by that? We all know that everyone that is, utilizing AI needs care. Everybody, whether you are a father, a mother, your parent, somebody needs care. So as a result, we know that care touches all of our lives. So why aren't we solving for it? And again, back to where we started, we're not solving for it because women have been doing this work and women have been doing it for free. And so I think it's really punting this back to Daanish to say, how do we get AI to to solve for care? What will make AI, the AI community, solve for care? Is it when we all bring our kids to the AI summit and dump them there? Will they listen to us then? Is it, I think there was a question that came out in one of the conversations, and actually it was a report. It was a report that came out about women, and I posted this in my LinkedIn. This was the largest study around women, and there were conversations around AI, around technology, around managers and men and women, but there was no mention of childcare, caregiving, or whatsoever. And so my question is, is it that we're all assuming that all children are dead, that men and women no longer have children? So that is really the question for AI. Does AI truly believe that women and children do not exist? So
it sounds like a question for you. How do we get, I'm going to take the middle question, but how do we get AI, the community working on AI, to solve for care?
Yeah, so I'll say a few things here. I think that one, I understand Blessing's making a systemic evaluation, but I think that there are all kinds of people in the world. I'm a single dad, and I do a lot of unpaid labor, and I'm not joking when I say I normally sleep between 3 and 4 hours a night. Because I'm running my own startup, which is unpaid. I'm helping on all these other fronts, which is also unpaid. And I have a child to raise, right? For example, it's school pickup time right now, right when the panel is happening, and I'm very lucky that another parent is, taking care of my kid, and they'll be arriving at my house shortly. While the panel is still ongoing. So I deal with this in a very real and embodied way, and I only say that in the most gentle and loving way as a counterpoint. The gender question is a little more complex. But to speak to the broader issue, I think, again, I said this earlier, I don't think that we can tech or use technology entirely to address these systems level problems that which are largely driven by politics and the kinds of political conversations that we should have, right? And I say that also as a dear friend of mine, Zohran Mamdani, has become mayor, a friend since that I've known Zohran since he was 12. Has become the mayor of New York City and is trying to escalate these issues, trying to raise these issues at a city level in a highly important way, and addressing some of the systemic architectural problems. The question that I asked myself, the question that I'm most interested in relation to the topic that we're talking about here, is how do we enhance the relational fabric of care, right? And if technology is put to any use, in my view, it should be at a systems level, enhancing the relational fabric of care. And
Can you say what that
also
is, Daanish? Just say what you mean by that. What do you mean by the relational fabric of care?
Yeah, so I think but you see in the narrative that I'm hearing from myself as I speak, and in the narrative that I'm hearing from Blessing, I think you see two parents who frankly are very frequently very exhausted trying to raise their kids and do their jobs and basically make ends meet and ensure that their children have the most opportunities possible, right? Um, so doing this requires a level of personal heroism that I don't think is appropriate. I think instead of that, if there were systems in place where, I got lucky, I got lucky and unlucky, and I'm giving this example not so that anyone feels bad about for me, but just to really bring it home. For this panel, I contacted multiple sitters. For some reason, no one was available in the middle of the day, so I had to rely on asking for a favor, and I got lucky with this other parent at my son's school who was willing to help me, right? But I think if there were a more reliable way to do this, that would be wonderful. Now, often the way society has gone is let's just punt it to the private sector. Let's invent some kind of parent tech that helps solve this problem. I don't think that that works because having children, birthing kids, raising kids is a human issue, right? And it's not some ancillary issue, it's a central issue to the future of our species. And I think it deserves it should command that level of attention and that kind of platform when it comes to the core of our political discourse. And that's where I'm coming from. When I say the relational fabric of care, I mean, to think of systems level interventions for this kind of thing. School lets out at 1:15 p.m. in my case. My workday doesn't end then, right? What ends up happening in my case is that I take care of my son from 1:15 to 7 p.m. when he falls asleep, and then I work from 8 p.m. till 2 or 3 a.m. every day. And then he's up at 6:37 a.m., which is how I get so little sleep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know that this isn't sustainable. And I'm not sharing this because, again, I'm some victim. I'm someone who has inordinate resources, and I'm continuing. But I am saying that this is not. This is very much within the mean, right? This is kind of like standard, and this is not a good standard.
Yeah. I'm going to start to bring us towards the end, and I'd love to end on a positive, hopeful, inspiring note, and also a specific note. So I wanted to ask both of you, maybe starting with Blessing, and also feel free to put in the chat. Is there something happening? It could be small or big. But specific, like a specific project, specific company, specific leader, specific community, specific idea that gives you a lot of hope and kind of a window into what the future could look like. And in your case, Blessing, in the future of work, is there, something that you look at and you say, wow, I can see how everything could be like that, but a really specific one that, like, if you were telling, my mom's 85, so pretend it's not me. Like, tell my mom she's 85. She doesn't work in this field, and she's asking, "What's the future of work? Where's the hope? Give me an example. Give me a story." What would you tell her?
I mean, I think that, I think one of the things that is giving me hope. So today I'm home and my husband is home with me, and, there's, he's going to go handle pickup, and, he's going to, take the kids to swimming since I have a broken leg anyways. But I think that, and just listening to Daanish, who is currently running on 3 hours of sleep, primarily, due to obviously his work, but also care. And I think what we are seeing more and more of is men stepping into care, which I actually think is a much more powerful conversation than AI. I could care less about AI at this point. I think that what I actually care more about is seeing in our current immediate future, that we are seeing that trend where men are stepping into care, men are being held accountable by, women, their partners, to be more involved, and they themselves want to be part of their children's lives. They are pushing back in the workplace, similarly to women in some cases, to say, no, I actually am going to put that 4 p.m. swimming in my calendar. I won't be available for that meeting because I'm taking my son to a baseball practice. And I think that is the future that I'm excited about, that, men like my husband can finally have the opportunity, to be part of their children's life and not miss out on the big things because they were chasing, some shiny object. And I think, for me, that gives me hope. And that actually gives me hope when we think about AI, because, when we look at where when we look at, the domains, even in AI, men are leading in that domain. And if those men step into care, then maybe we can finally use AI to solve for care.
Yeah, no, I think that trend, and there was a couple men who were actually commenting about their own experience, of care and using AI to help them. But I think this trend makes a lot of sense. I see it too. There's one, I don't know if you know him, Blessing, but this gentleman, Elliot Ray, in the UK, who runs a campaign organization called Parenting Out Loud. So I just point that out to folks. Because his idea of parenting out loud is when you're at work, like bring your fatherhood to work, put in your outlook. I have to pick up my son, like make your fathering visible. So it feels normal to do that. And so it encourages other people to do it. So I think Elliot's work I've just begun to learn about is a great example of trying to bring a workplace to a point where it will adapt, so men will do more of the care work. Are there any other like projects, examples, people that you think are doing a great job on getting men more involved in care?
Absolutely. I mean, my friend Eve Rodsky, I'm sure you know her, and Dr. Darby Saxby, who is writing a book on Dad Brain. I think, they're just a lot of remarkable people. And even now on social media, we're seeing more and more women, demanding care, demanding for shared responsibility and ownership, which I think is super important. And a lot of those examples, right? We share it not because, women are tired of, providing care, which women are physically and emotionally exhausted, but it's actually because men are being denied of their humanity. Men are being told that, if you, work longer, if you, just, burn the candles on both ends, that, you will be successful. And then they get to the end of their lives and they realize that, oh my goodness, like I've missed the mark. I don't know anything about my child, or my child won't call me. And so I think there's a lot of studies that actually show that, a lot of men on their deathbed are basically saying that we missed out on not, being a huge part of our children's lives and not spending much, as much time at home. And I think, for those that are asking the question around, how do I get my partner to get more involved in this early childhood that is so hard and so exhausting? One of the good examples that I always bring up is my husband. When we had my fourth child, and I couldn't go up the stairs because that was my fourth C-section. And, of course, he had all the bath toys and, getting the things ready for the kids. And I used to be the one giving the kids a bath. And I run it like an assembly line. It might be my weird background in engineering, but I'm literally like, each child come in, I just, shake their head, wash it, and toss them out. And I noticed that they were spending a lot more time in the bathroom, and I was like, but I hear lots of music, and they're dancing, and he's a germaphobe, so he's like sanitizing everything, the kids are sanitizing, and later on, like, it just became very clear that this was really an enjoyable moment for them, like, this was their time together. And, in the back of my mind, I'm like, first of all, I will never forget this because, this is such a happy moment. But I'm sure the kids will never forget. The kids still tell me that, Mommy, you're the worst, like, bath time parent. Like, don't do it ever again. Like, please call daddy. And so these are the things, right? He's going to remember that. The kids are going to remember that. That is his humanity, right? No one can take that away from him. And I think these are the kind of messaging that I think we need to start sharing with men, is that this is actually for you. This is not like, you're not helping me. You're not like, you're not leaving work and rushing to pick up the kids because you're supporting me. You are actually doing it for yourself, for your humanity. Because at the end of the day, that's really what matters to a lot of us, is our humanity.
Yeah. Josh, I'm gonna give you the last word, but just before you tell us your sort of final thoughts on the matter and go hang out with your son, I just wanted to let people know that in a week there's another one of these sessions, and there's actually, I'm not doing the interview, my colleague Rushta is, but there's two men on the panel. One is Lee Gettler, who studies the biology of fatherhood, works very closely with Darby, and how sort of caregiving for men changes our body, our brain, and makes the point that we're designed for this too. And as Blessing was saying, we can get a lot out of it. For our health, for our spirit, for our purpose, for everything. And the other is Morad Farid, who's a former footballer who's working on trying to get football clubs focused on maternal health and supporting new moms. So there'll be, if you want to follow the thread, you get to hear from two men who are really focused on care in early childhood in a week's time. I'll be on holiday with my daughter, so I won't be joining. But Daanish, last words. What's your wisdom, your insight for the future? Something that you see happening that keeps you going even on 3 or 4 hours of sleep?
I mean, there is so much to say here. One minor point, which is I'm a little bit wary of memes. I know I talked about social media earlier and recommender AI, and I find, I have to say, I find this kind of idea that generally the assumption in any argument or any discourse around the issue that father equals absent, father equals not caring, but now we're changing it to fathers being caring. I find it very flattening and very Western, and it's not my embodied experience, for what it's worth, as a person who has ancestry in the Middle East, South Asia, and Central Asia. And certainly it's not my lived experience currently. I don't have any woman in my life. My mom isn't around. My mom lives in a different country. I'm in London. I don't have a partner. I'm just a single dad. So so I think that people live in all kinds of ways, and the way that men behave varies a lot by culture. And so just being a little, just that, minor note of caution around looking at things in a very flattening way, and being a little bit wary of that, and a little bit wary of social media discourse, which tends to not necessarily have a strong relationship with facts sometimes. Mm-hmm. The second thing I want to say is that in relation to what I'm excited about this. I'm excited about this conversation. I'm excited that 270 people, came on this afternoon, and we all came together and we talked about this, and we talked out these types of tough issues around parenting and technology, and what it means in this kind of evolving climate. What I'm most excited about when it comes to this type of community for the future, and particularly in the way that software is being democratized that I talked about earlier, I'm interested in having code, i.e. software code, become a mirror for how we care for each other, how we care for one another as a community. That's what I care about, right? How do we shape code? Now, we can vibe code, or we can, whatever word you want to use. Vibe code I don't like because I think it's slightly pejorative. But there's something very important here. There's a kind of social revolution in the offing, right? If we can build software ourselves, how do we have it become a mirror for our relationships with one another in a deeply caring way? And I think that is a powerful antidote and rejoinder to the culture of social media, that encourages greater atomization and isolation, or that makes you think that you need to look a certain way in order to be worthy as a human being. It's a great rejoinder to the culture of individualism, right? And it's also a great rejoinder to how politics, certainly in the West, is turning toward greater insularity within communities and thinking of others as less. Just one minor point. London, where I live, is one of the safest cities in the world. I thought New York was safe. London is even safer than New York statistically. Yet when you go online, people act in such a strange way. I mean, what you see online is that, there's crime and murder and everything is, these criminals are rampaging around London in a way that is entirely divorced from reality, right? And so my whole thing is, how do we come together and push back against these things? And how do we come together as parents caring for our own children and one another's children? And let's build that kind of future together. That's what I really, really care about. And I think that the tools are there now, where it's not some empty talking point of heal the world. We have the tools at our fingertips.
I think that's a great place to end. Great sentiment to end on. Super grateful for everyone who joined. Tons of resources and ideas were shared in the chat, so we'll figure out a way to make sure everyone gets it. I saw Make Mothers Matter. I saw the Fatherhood Institute. I saw Tandem, Equimundo. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And just to end by saying thank you to Daanish and to Blessing. Blessing, I hope your ACL heals soon. And glad that you have a husband who's willing to do this work so that you can take care of yourself while you're healing, and hopefully other people in your support network. And Daanish, I wish you a wonderful afternoon with your son.
Thank you, Blessing, and thank you, Michael, for this opportunity, and thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Daanish, and thank you, Mike.
Take care, and please join us next week to hear from Lee and Morad. They're going to be super interesting and very on point, very much on this theme. So it's going to be a good follow-up. I didn't know that's where we'd land today, but the universe had a plan in store for us, I suppose. Awesome. Take care. Bye-bye.